Watch this vidcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back, horror hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
I'm James Rivera. Today we're going to give you an interview with Veronica Burgess, a producer and assistant director co-assistant director with me actually on Michael Pickle's upcoming film Pay Up, as well as various other projects. And we're going to review the cult classic The Exorcist III, the brand new Shudder exclusive Z, and Dario Argento's follow-up to Suspiria, Inferno. But before we get to that, we have to get to
Horror Show news.
So Scott Derrickson is signed on to direct a sequel to Labyrinth.
An indie horror film, The Wretched, becomes the biggest movie in the country.
A spin-off of American Horror Story is coming to FX titled American Horror Stories.
And HBO launches HBO Max with an impressive horror collection.
Jason Blum announces a seismic event in the Spawn production. All right, let's get to it. So, Scott Derrickson, 34 years after the original Labyrinth, the one with David Bowie, he's going to be directing the sequel. The sinister director has been chosen to direct. It will have Maggie Levine, who wrote and directed Hulu's Into the Dark entry My Valentine, is writing the script. No plot details have been revealed, even though the film has been in development for years. Now, there might be a good movie here to be made. Scott Derrickson is obviously a talented filmmaker after being kicked off of the Doctor Strange, the latest Doctor Strange film, only to be replaced by another horror filmmaker. It's kind of ironic. My biggest problem is how are we going to do this without David Bowie? Such a element of what makes Labyrinth a classic.
That's really going to hinge on what, the success of this movie is going to hinge on who they cast in the David Bowie as a David Bowie character, the Goblin King. It has to be someone Bowie-esque, someone larger than life,
It's the Goblin King is kind of like a rock star himself, which makes sense. The casting of a rock star like David Bowie, who always projected kind of an otherworldliness, especially in the 70s and the 80s, and his whole persona, like you said, was so larger than life, and it was kind of like what made the film snap together, and it's a lot of what made the original Labyrinth work. So they need to find a very charismatic actor. They can find some rock star, I don't know who, but it has to be, they have really big shoes to fill. Now, maybe they're not going to have the Goblin King in here. I have no idea what it's going to be, but it's hard to imagine Labyrinth without a Goblin King.
Yeah, and this whole thing with Scott Derrickson, I just don't like the whole thing. I don't like seeing directors like that tossed around Hollywood from, previous IP to previous IP. Give him something original. He came out right out of the box and proved himself with Exorcism of Emily Rose and Sinister, and even Deliver Us from Evil was pretty good. So why on earth they started throwing him around from project to project, I don't know. But I just want this Labyrinth to be over with and done. I'm sure it'll be a good movie, and then so we can move on to other things. Something original.
I think I agree. As we've always said this on the podcast, Hollywood looks at up-and-coming filmmakers that have great successes with original films, and the first thing they think is, oh, they can do a remake or a reboot or a continuation, instead of, nurturing the kind of success that they made in the first place with their original films. But I digress. That's Hollywood.
Because the studios seem to be like, oh, that guy done really good with that little indie film. Let's put him in a big superhero film, or let's put him in this big remake,
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it works. I mean, I can't deny that some original filmmakers have done fantastic work with blockbuster films, especially like someone like James Wan, who did the Fast and the Furious and the Aquaman. Yeah. But James Wan still goes back and forth between original smaller projects and big budget studio films. He has that forgot what actor, I think it was Thomas Jane, who said you do one for the condo and one for the art.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of trying to balance commerce and art at the same time. And when you're lucky, the two meet.
So this next story I'm really excited about. Indie horror film The Wretched becomes the biggest movie in the country. This is a low-budget horror film from IFC Films. It's called The Wretched. It's been a #1 at the box office for 5 weeks. thanks to its success in drive-in theaters. Drive-in theaters making a huge comeback in the COVID-19 lockdown. And the film was released in 12 drive-in theaters on May 1st and grossed almost $66,000, which isn't huge by normal standards, but in our times we're living in right now, it's pretty huge. That was the first weekend, and is now in 59 theaters and has made almost $650,000 so far. It's directed by Brett and Drew Pierce, who directed Deadheads in 2011. I haven't seen that one, but I heard it was good. And the film follows a young boy as he battles a witch who has moved in next door. And successful horror films during lockdown seems to be a trend, like with like Invisible Man and The Hunt were in theaters right when the lockdown happened, and then they enjoyed this huge success online. Horror seems to be thriving in these crazy times.
I find the returns of drive-ins kind of fascinating because we all started to look at those. I mean, there were a handful here and there, and I've been to them before. I've been to them recently, but it's kind of a dying thing, something that past generations did, something that people mostly only see drive-in theaters in old movies these days. You rarely ever get to see them. It's kind of cool that they're making a comeback, and it is definitely it was definitely smart for all these drive-in theaters that lasted to stay open, because now they get to thrive in the particular situation that's happening right now.
Well, it gave cinema such a huge jump start when drive-in theaters first came out, and now I think it's going to do the same thing again. I was really worried about cinemas shutting down, and I was really worried about how we're going to integrate back into them. But this drive-in theater thing is the perfect answer. I mean, they've been dying out, especially over the last few years. You see them, the very few that are left are closing down. But now all of them are opening back up. People are going in parking lots and making their own drive-in theaters. I think it's going to be a huge thing.
So there's a spin-off of American Horror Stories coming to FX titled American Horror Stories. Now, this is going to be a little different from the typical American Horror Story format. Ryan Murphy has teased a possible anthology series that features standalone episodes like The Twilight Zone, and it's now official that FX has given it the green light. I don't really get how Ryan Murphy does what he does, because he has that Hollywood series on Netflix. He has American Horror Story on FX and American Crime Story. He has another one, I think it's Pose. Something about the transgender community. I don't know how this man manages to develop all these different projects and still produce so much successful TV, and now he's taking another one on. Geez, that's hard work.
American Horror Story just got picked up for 4 more seasons, and then he's got this now.
I really don't know how he does it. I mean, I've loved American Horror Story for the most part. I mean, it had certain dips here and there, but I think the failures of American Horror Story are something that happens when you have a show that's that ambitious or that takes that many risks. I feel like the more risks you take and the more bold you get, the more you are susceptible to flaws and small failures here and there. But on the whole, I think it's been a fucking spectacular success.
Yeah, I feel good about this project because American Horror Story, even their worst seasons, had some really great standalone episodes. Mm-hmm. Within a season that I hated, they still had some really good episodes in there. So I think where it's one-off episodes like this, I think he'll come up with a lot of really cool ideas, and he definitely shows that he can flesh out a good idea. And especially in that short form like that, I think it's going to be good. I mean, there's no details about what exactly these stories are going to be about, but I'm guessing it's going to be like American Crime Story, where it's going to be true horrific stories that are put into narrative form like this. That's what I'm guessing. And next story, we got another huge streaming app for people to watch movies on. It's HBO Max. HBO launched a new streaming service called HBO Max, and it's over 120 horror films will be available on their launch. It's got all the Nightmare on Elm Street films, over 10 Godzilla films, 4 Alien movies, 4 Jaws movies, Critters, Funny Games, The Blob, The Brood, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and more. The service is $14.99 a month, and they offer a 7-day free trial.
So, I don't have HBO Max yet, but I do plan to get it because I was perusing through its content. It has to launch with that many horror titles initially is impressive as it is. But if you really look at what HBO Max has acquired, they also have a DC section. So from what I understand, the DC app, the DC Universe app, might actually get absorbed into HBO Max. So that's going to give them more cachet. They have a shit ton of horror movies. It has access to everything from Turner Classic Movies, so you could see a lot of old movies. And it's like a mini Criterion channel. They have Ingmar Bergman and Fellini movies. They have a Cartoon Network section. They have an Adult Swim section, so you're going to get Rick and Morty on there as well. They have Studio Ghibli, which is the most notorious, the biggest anime studio in the world. They have Crunchyroll, and from what I heard, they're trying to get Nickelodeon too. I'm just going through all the content. And on top of that, all the HBO original series that they already have and all the movies they already have access to. HBO is really fucking stepping up the game for streaming sites. Like, their content really, really makes me want to get this app.
Yeah, I mean, the horror section doesn't seem to be as well curated as something like Shudder. And, a lot of the choices are typical, like, of course, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is going to be on there. Of course, the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Of course, Friday the 13th. But they also have films like Haxan, like old horror films that you don't see that much, I
mean, there's no way it's going to be as well curated as Shudder, because Shudder is strictly horror, and that's their bread and butter, and that's what it's going off of. But for a service that isn't specializing in it, that's a pretty damn impressive way to launch. And if you're somebody who's just getting into horror, it might be a good app for you, because besides the horror, they have a ridiculous amount of selection on HBO Max. I think they're acquiring all this, like the horror movies, like TCM and DC and all of that, to try to compete with Disney Plus. And so far, I think it looks like it's going to be kicking Disney Plus's ass as far as content goes.
And usually when you see this many horror selections on a streaming service, there's a lot of filler in there. I don't see a lot of filler in these.
Jason Blum has recently announced a quote-unquote seismic event in the Spawn movie production. Now, we've been tracking Spawn on this podcast. I think since we first launched the podcast, we've been keeping track of it. And it's slowly been getting closer and closer and closer. And Jason Blum is a very serious businessman. So when he says stuff is in motion or it's going forward, he actually means it. He won't specify what the seismic event is, but he said that production is moving forward at a rapid rate and it's very active. So I don't know if it means that the certain star that they have attached to it, or what exactly is going on, but it looks like Spawn is a go, and it looks like it's becoming irreversible. Finally.
Yeah.
And what better studio to do a Spawn film than Blumhouse? Because I know its roots as a comic book. I know Spawn is kind of a superhero, more of an anti-hero, really. I don't think there's any hero-based comic book that is more drenched in horror and horror iconography than Spawn.
And I like to hear that somebody else is talking about the developments besides Todd McFarlane.
Yeah, that makes it sound more official. This isn't just Todd McFarlane telling us it's coming again. This is a big studio head who seems very enthused about the project. I wonder if they're going to keep Jamie Foxx on. I wonder if they're keeping Jeremy Renner on. I would like to, but you know what? If this movie's going to be good, it's not going to need big stars like Jeremy Renner or Jamie Foxx. That's not going to be it's not going to be a make or break deal for me. I will see it whoever they choose to cast in this movie. Would be nice to get big stars, but it's not a must for me.
So if it's not the stars, I wonder what prompted Jason Blum to say, yeah, this is seismic, let's go.
I don't know, but I'm excited.
There's been some interesting developments with this thing. It was frustrating for a while, but it looks like it's finally, some real developments are coming.
So next we have up an interview with Veronica Burgess, producer, actress, model, stuntwoman, camera operator, jack of all trades, and a producer on Michael Pickle's upcoming horror film, Pay Up. Enjoy.
Horror show exclusive.
All right, everyone, we'd like to welcome to the show the awesome actress and producer, Veronica Burgess.
Hi.
How you doing today, Veronica?
I'm great. How are you guys?
We're doing pretty good. So before we get started, I have a question for you before we get into this. How are you handling your lockdown situation?
Oh, well, I mean, with everything shut down in the industry, it's a little hard that way because, you know, that's normally how we're keeping busy and working, and so that's challenging. But I'm really enjoying the slow-paced nature of how life has been over the last couple months, and like really just taking the time to like, you know, be present with my family and like focus on like personal projects that I've been wanting to do. So like that's been really great. But I'm anxious to get back to work.
We all are.
But
Yeah,
Veronica and
I
I,
think everybody is, right?
Veronica and I have quite a history together. We worked with Gil Claveria together. We worked with Sean Williams together, and she was also one of the producers on the original horror show pilot and played one of the co-hosts, Bloody Carrie. And she was actually nominated for Shockfest Sweetheart at, I believe it was the 2014 Shockfest. So she's awesome.
Yeah, that was super fun.
And I read that you grew up as a dancer, and then you had 4 years in the Navy, and then you got a Bachelor of Science degree in kinesiology. I had to look it up. It's study of body movement.
Kinesiology.
Kinesiology, yeah.
Yeah. So with all this, what made you turn to acting as a career?
You know, I mean, I've always just enjoyed, you know, being creative, and even when I've been otherwise directed, like when I was in the Navy, you know, I still enjoyed doing creative things, whether it was, you know, something simple like decorating a section of the ship for like a specific event or function, or you know, if it was like throwing together like Thanksgiving for like the entire, you know, department that I was a part of, and like, you know, me and my girlfriends like cooked for everyone, and like, you know, I've always just enjoyed being like creative in some way. And so when I got out and I was going to college, and I loved like what I studied in college, kinesiology is like a big passion of mine because I've always been very like health and fitness oriented, and it tied right into that. But I just kind of found myself like wondering, like, you know, when I was a kid, I always wanted to try out modeling, and I never did because my parents were like, well, we only really have time for you to be involved in one thing. And, you know, I was so integrated into the dance world that it just made sense to like stick with that one thing. But it had always been an interest of mine. So I started doing modeling, and that's where I met Sean, who you mentioned earlier, a mutual colleague of ours, and we started shooting together and doing all kinds of things. And then he actually made a short film and was like, hey, do you want to be a part of this? And I was like, sure. I mean, I hadn't acted since I was like 12, so I was like, I guess, you know. And I showed up and I had so much fun, and I was like, oh my gosh, like people can like do this for a living, like this is interesting, you know. And so I kind of fell into it, and you know, I wasn't necessarily looking for it. It kind of found me, and then like I have just been doing it ever since. And it's such a thrill to be able to do any role, but like particularly roles like you were speaking about with the original horror show when I got to do Bloody Carrie. I love that role because it's so fun to do something that's like a little sinister and a little naughty, but like, you know what I mean? I love those roles.
So you kind of fell into it. It wasn't something that you originally thought you were going to be then.
No. Oh my God. I was like, I mean, I was going to school for kinesiology. I thought I was going to go the physical therapy route and be like a physical therapist and, you know, get my master's and all of that stuff. But then I shadowed a friend of mine who was a physical therapist, and I realized that it wasn't really what I was thinking it was going to be. And by that time I had already started auditioning and doing things within the entertainment industry. So I was like, well, let me just go that way. And like that degree has served me well. I mean, like whenever I audition for like medical shows or doctors or nurses or whatever in a show or a movie, the terminology is like familiar to me, so that serves me well in that capacity. So it's a win-win.
So why are you drawn to the horror genre? What draws you to this?
Just fun. Like, there's just something about it. Like, I mean, I grew up like watching like Friday the 13th and like Nightmare on Elm Street and like all those like classic, you know, Poltergeist. What's the other one I'm thinking of? The Exorcist. You know, I grew up watching these movies, and like they were always like terrifying, but like I'd be watching like this, you know. Like, but oh yeah, I do. And there's nothing like it out there. Like, you know, they can be fun and kind of campy, but then they can also be like terrifying to the point where you can't sleep for a couple of weeks. And then they can also be like psychologically disturbing, and like it just kind of sits with you, and like you're fine, but like it's like there, and like there's just so many things you can do with it, you know, with the horror genre.
Okay. Yeah, so you married Ronnie Blevins, the awesome character actor, in 2016.
Yeah.
And then you had the adorable son, Leo.
Yeah.
So how does having a husband and a child, how is that affecting your career?
I mean, luckily, like, I think because my husband is an actor, like, we really, like, we get it, you know? Like, he gets what I need and I get what he needs. And we work really well together as a team. And, you know, there's only been, like, a couple of times since Leo was born that, like, we both were unavailable, but thankfully we have, you know, his parents, my parents, and like we've always just kind of worked it out. Like it really does take a village. And I mean, Mike, you got a couple of kids, you know.
Yeah.
It takes a village, right? And your kids are amazing. Like I hope Leo, I think he will, but like I hope he grows up to be like your kids. They're so sweet, they're so smart, they're so just polite and wonderful kids. So, you know, it really didn't affect. I mean, I shot an episode of Shameless when I was like 8 months pregnant. Like I really just didn't stop, you know. I just kind of kept going.
How did you land that part on Shameless?
Well, my manager at the time got me the audition, and it was actually like a straight to producers session. And because, you know, they wanted real pregnant women, and there's not a whole lot of us that were like, you know, showing and like, you know, like really showing, like, and so I think it was like me and like 3 or 4 other girls that were there, and just went in and did my spin on the character and just created my moments when I had them, and that was that. And I actually walked out of that audition thinking, I had like 3 other auditions that week, also for like pregnant women, well, other roles, but like they were like, oh, they were for comedies. They were like, oh, it'd be funny if this person just so happened to also be pregnant. And so I'd had these other auditions, and I was like, oh, I nailed those. I'm definitely gonna book one of those. And then I did the Shameless one, and I was like, I don't know, like I guess I was fine. But I remember like throwing the sides in the trash on my walk out to my car because I'm like, I'm not gonna book that one. I'll book one of the other one. And that's the one I booked.
So you've done a lot of action films, especially in the last couple of years. You did Cops and Robbers in 2017 with Michael Jai White. And then there was a comedy, The Way We Weren't, and you're in both of these with Ronnie. Yeah. So are you drawn to action as much as you are horror? And is it because of your physicality from being in the Navy?
Well, I mean, I love action. And honestly, you know, if I could like do one thing a little bit differently, if I could go back like 10 years and just do one thing a little bit differently, it would be to integrate myself more into like the stunt community, because I just think that that's so much fun. And I love anything physically challenging. Like I'm here for all that. And although in Cops and Robbers, I didn't get to do anything like physically and super awesome, like it was an action drama, and so it was just great to be a part of that cast. And Michael was an amazing scene partner, and we also had Rampage in that as well, and he was great. And It was super fun because we shot that down in Mexico. Like, it was kind of like a dream come true. And I was also in a play at the time, so I was literally like, I'd go down there, I'd shoot for a couple days, and I'd come back here and I'd do like play rehearsals, and then I'd go back down there, shoot for a couple days. Like, it was like back and forth for like a month between like Mexico and LA, and I was like, oh, this is like the life. And then The Way We Weren't is actually a romantic comedy, although, you know, there are some action-y sequences in there. But my character was just very, it was fun because it's not really a character I get to play a lot. Like, I was this sort of like highfalutin, like spoiled girlfriend, and I don't really get to play those characters a lot. So it was really fun to do that. And up until recently, like, Ronnie and I have been in projects together, but we've never actually acted together, which was like, I mean, you know, and we've been together for like 7 years, and like, but we've never like acted together up until recently.
So do you feel that being you've done a lot of your own stunts on films, and that's not a lot of thing that a lot of actors do. Do you feel that your being in the Navy really prepared you to do that, or do you think that makes it easier to land certain roles when you could say, I can do my own stunts?
I mean, I think anytime there's like a willingness for you to save production money, and like also speaking on as being a producer, I would look at somebody, if it was between two actors that was like, this person was like, I can do my own stunts, and this person was like, I don't know, maybe get me a stunt double, I'd be like, well, let's just go with this person. Mm-hmm. You know? But as an actor, like, I think that having the willingness to just go there and to just take chances and take risks is really important. I mean, within reason. Like, if somebody's like, hey, I want you to dangle off the side of the Empire State Building, I'd be like, let's get a stunt double.
You're not going no Tom Cruise levels yet?
No, nobody's ever going to be on Tom Cruise levels. That man is like amazing. But like, you know, if it's like, you know, will you do your own, you know, fight sequences? Will you, you know, drive this car kind of recklessly? Like, stuff like that. Bring it on. Like, that's fun. And, you know, yes, I have a certain amount of preparedness from my military experience, but because I was in the Navy and not like the Army or the Marines, we didn't have that much like hand-to-hand combat or anything like that. I actually learned a majority of that just by doing it on set. And I was actually a part of this web series called The Superheroines, and it was super popular, and it was a lot of fun, and every episode was different. And I learned a lot of my stunt choreography through that, and just doing different episodes, and they had stunt coordinators, and then also other projects that had stunt coordinators, and I was like, yeah, just teach me what to do and I'll do it. And luckily they trusted me, and it all worked out. And but most of what I've learned has just been through doing it on set.
Cool. Well, you have a couple really cool sounding projects coming up, like the one upcoming action drama, Death in Texas. It's with Stephen Lang, who just did Don't Breathe in VFW. Lara Flynn
he was
Boyle.
So good in Don't Breathe. So good.
Oh yeah, he was. And Lara Flynn Boyle and Bruce Dern. Did you get to act on screen with any of them?
I got to act with Bruce Dern, which was like, I was like, hang on, I'm just gonna pinch myself, like, just act like a legend here. Yeah. So I got to have a scene with him, and then my other scenes, I actually had a scene with my husband. Because he plays the lead in this film, and so we finally got to act together, which was like very fun. But working with Bruce was amazing. You know what I love about him is that he's an improviser. So like, he'll obviously say what's in the script, but like, he'll put his own spin on it. And he told me a story about Bruce, I'm sorry if you're watching this and I'm going to butcher this story, but like, somebody nicknamed his improvisational things that he does as Dernsies. And like, it's just so cool to be able to like act opposite somebody who is just throwing things out there, and like you're just in that mindset of play too, so you just roll with it and you just see what happens, and every take is a little different.
Okay. So I know that we already know this, but for the audience, you are a producer on Michael Pickle right here, his upcoming film Pay Up. It's going to be hitting the festival circuit soon. Could you let the audience know how you landed this part?
Well, I remember when Mike had finished the script, and he asked me if I wanted to produce it and or be one of the producers, help you guys produce it. I said, well, yeah, send over the script, let me read it. And I read it, and I was like, oh, this is different and interesting, because it goes along with that like campy horror film kind of genre, but it's different. And I don't want to give anything away by saying how it's different, but it's different because traditionally in campy horror genre films, there's like, you know, sort of a, how do I say this? Sort of like a female bimbo that always runs around and like gets herself killed, and she's like half naked when she gets killed and like stuff like that. And so like that's kind of what you expect, and this is not that. And so I really liked that aspect. I also really am interested in anything having to do with like occult stuff. I just find it like super fascinating. I mean, nothing that I would personally be involved in because I'm like way too much of a scaredy cat. But like, it's like really interesting for me to do like research on like different cults out there, and like how people like, I don't know, I don't even know, like get their mindset into like the same mindset with all these other people, and I don't even know how that happens. Probably because I'm just such a like independent person. Like I could probably never allow myself to like sort of be brainwashed. Yes. I don't want to offend anyone out there, but it's just very interesting to me. Like I was actually, funny enough that we're talking about this, because I was actually like researching the Waco, the whole thing with did you guys watch Waco?
We haven't watched it yet.
Oh, so good. Anyway, I was researching that whole thing. I went down this rabbit hole of like research about, you know, that whole incident, and like the, you know, that they called it a cult. You could call it religious sect, whatever you want to call it. But I just kind of went down this rabbit hole, and then it was like 2 a.m. and I was like, oh, been on my phone for like 2 hours looking at this stuff. But I've always found it interesting, so that really appealed to me as well. And then Mike and I have worked together like over the past decade, you know, on different stuff, and I love working with Mike. So it was like no brainer.
Well, you're very valuable to the production of Pay Up, between recruiting people to help us film it, and then your organization on set. So what was the most challenging part of the Pay Up process for you?
I feel like you guys know what I'm going to say. Scheduling?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, scheduling was definitely hard, because we started shooting it in November. So it was like around the holidays. So we had to deal with people's like out of town schedules, right? And then we had to deal with like locations, and like, you know, people were having like, I mean, the people that, you know, gave us our locations were phenomenal, and like so grateful for them for providing these locations. But, you know, they had their own things, their own lives going on, and their own, you know, holiday plans and blah, 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 whatever. And so it was like between like scheduling cast and crew and like working with the locations and like figuring out when we could actually use them, like that was the absolute hardest thing of the whole production.
Yeah. It was such a tiny budget. You can't ask too much of people, you know, because there wasn't a lot to work with.
Yeah. And I mean, I look back on like what we did with such a small budget, and I'm like, Not trying to like toot our own horns, but toot. Like, we did really good. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, there's like people out there that have like, 10 times our budget that don't put out something that like we've got. You know what I mean? And I haven't even seen the final. I haven't even seen the final cut. The last cut that I saw was before the sound was put in, before the color correction, before all of that. So I'm excited to see.
Oh, I think you're gonna like what we did in the editing process for the film. It was actually a real pleasure to work with you on set because you brought so much to it. What do you think was the funnest part about working on Pay Up with Mike and I?
I mean, somebody once told me that all anybody wants to do is just work with their friends.
Yeah.
And it's true. When you work with your friends, like, it's so much more fun. And that's not to say that you can't show up on a set and not know anybody and within a couple of hours, like, have a bunch of new friends and it's a great experience. Like, that happens all the time, obviously. But, like, I've known Mike for so long, and, like, some of the other, cast and crew I had known for years, and we had worked together like a long time ago, James. And so it was just great to like just kind of be reunited with everyone and be coming together for like one collective purpose, which was to make the best film we possibly could, given time, budget, and resources, and I think we did that.
Cool, and we're actually having the first screening. We're recording this on Thursday, but when it releases on Saturday, that night we're doing a little screening where we're going to play some of my old short films for the cast and crew. And then at 8 o'clock at night, we're going to play the movie for everybody. So this will be the first time that everybody has seen the full, complete product. And I really hope everyone will like it and think that it was worth all the work and everything, blood, sweat, and tears we put into it.
Really quick, just so the audience doesn't get confused, it's a private screening, so you can't join us.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, peeps.
Yeah, anybody who isn't directly related to the production will get to see it later on. So go see it at the festivals, and when we release it online or wherever we release it, go see it and check it out and support it, because there's a lot of people came together, including Veronica, to make this work, and I'm really proud of how it came out. Thanks to everyone who was involved.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what you can accomplish if everybody just does a little bit. And I mean, and you were at the helm of this, Mike. I mean, you had a lot of weight on your shoulders, from the time that you wrote it, and then like, directing it and just kind of envisioning like how everything was going to happen. And like, so I'm glad to hear you say that, like, you love how it turned out and you're really excited about it. 'Cause I think that is one of the most important things about this whole process is like, when we get to work with each other, like, and somebody has a vision of what they want this to be, and then it turns out to be that way, that's like super rewarding because it's so cool. Like, it may not have always been easy, but like, we did it. We made it happen, And I'm really, really excited. I mean, I don't know what's going to go on with the festivals in terms of like, if they're all going to be virtual now, or hopefully, because a lot of them are in the fall, like, we could go. I don't know. But, whatever capacity we can be a part of it in, I'm super excited to see how those audiences receive the film, and it's going to be really, really fun.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how it's received, because it's got the exploitation elements that a lot of horror fans like, but it's also heavy on drama and story. So I'm really anxious to see how it's received.
Well,
yeah.
It's not an exploitation film, but it has sequences that are a little bit more hardcore than in some exploitation movies, but what's surrounding those sequences is not exploitation. It's more of a horror drama.
Well, and it's also different exploitation than you would expect.
Yeah. That's all we can give away for that. So
I wish I could talk about that aspect more, but I want it to be a surprise for everyone.
I know. It's like really hard because you're like, what can I say without giving away all the things?
There's no way to say it without giving anything away.
Yeah.
So, I was gonna ask you. You've been a producer, an actress, and assistant director, various jobs, and you've even done, from what I've read, were a camera operator on a few projects.
Yeah.
What is your favorite position as far as the production process goes? You like being in front of the camera more or behind the camera?
I like them both equally, which, I feel like isn't common, but maybe it is. I don't know. But I like them both equally. I really like producing, but I've done like line producing and more like brass tacks, kinds of businessy kinds of things. But I think I prefer much more of like creative producing, like being partially responsible in the development of the story and where it goes and like who the players are and stuff like that. Like I really enjoy that. Not to say that I don't enjoy like the nuts and bolts stuff, because I do have a little bit of like type A-ness, so I do kind of get off on like when I was like putting the schedule together for Pay Up, like on that one day where like we literally had like everybody. It took me like, I don't even remember, many hours to like figure out like, okay, it's like a puzzle, right? But then once I did it, I was like, yeah, like, and it was fun because it was hard, it was challenging, and it's sort of tedious work, but like, it's nice to sort of see how the pieces of the puzzle fit together, and how you can just, solve that problem. So I really like the producing side of things. I really would love to direct something. Like that is on my wish list, and I got a couple of things that I'm writing right now that I would like to also direct. So that's kind of something that I was planning on doing this year, but I'm not sure with the COVID-19 thing. I'm not sure when we're going to be able to get back to work and how all that's going to play out. So we'll just kind of have to see. But and then of course acting is like my first love, and I will always love it, because the opportunity for you to just be someone else is, what a gift, like to be someone else and like tell their story from their viewpoint, whether it's in a horror film or a comedy or a drama, whatever, like whether it's a real person or a completely fake person. Like I think that we have a responsibility as actors to not only tell the story, but tell it from a perspective of understanding of who this person is and why their viewpoint is important. And so I just love that.
Well, I certainly look forward to anything that you have upcoming in the future, because having worked with you, I've seen firsthand how in command you are of every situation and how you take charge. So I'm excited to see your future projects, Veronica.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to work with you guys again.
So are there any other upcoming projects that you have coming up that we haven't mentioned yet?
Nothing that I can talk about yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. Your husband, and I'm sorry to get away to this, your husband, Ronnie Blevins, is in the upcoming Conjuring movie.
I know.
The devil made me do it. Do we know when this is going to be released, or when the public will finally get to see the latest Conjuring film?
Well, originally it was slated for a September release.
Okay.
To my knowledge, that has not changed.
Mm-hmm.
But with the COVID thing, who knows?
Yeah.
So I'm still hoping that it's September. But we just have to wait and see. Y'all, I am such a fangirl about the Conjuring series, and like the director for this Conjuring film, Michael Chaves, he directed the Curse of La Llorona. Have you guys seen that?
Yeah.
So good, so good, and totally underrated in my opinion. Like, I mean, why was that not blowing up? Like, hello, terrifying. Again, kids. So I mean, I love that film. So I'm just over the moon excited about what the heck The Conjuring 3 is going to be, and of course having Ronnie in it, and you know, he plays a really good role. It's a really good role for him. So.
Well, hopefully when the release date gets closer and things are more certain, we'll talk Ronnie into coming on the show and.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, he's
details.
totally down. But yeah, it just nobody knows anything.
Cool.
So.
Oh,
Well, thank you guys so much. This has been such a pleasure, just rapping out with y'all and getting a touch base. And what do you guys have going on? Enough about me.
Well, we're still working on the podcast. We're working on getting Mike's film Pay Up out into the festival circuit. Mike actually has another film on the horizon. We shouldn't share the details about it quite yet. But interesting prospects. Working on the horror show, writing scripts. So I think we're doing pretty good. But
yeah, we're working with another producer for my next project. It's based on a family tragedy, so we're going to tell that story. And he has connections with Blumhouse and Fangoria, so we're going to try to pitch it to them. So we're in the middle.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember you telling me a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Is it that one?
yes.
Yeah, that one.
Yes. I have a question. Before you go, Veronica, we wanted to know, what are some of your favorite horror movies? What influences you?
Ooh, well, I mean, I just went on and on about the Conjuring series for 5 minutes. So obviously that's one of them. I mean, literally terrifying. Every time I see one of those movies, it's just like I can't sleep right for 2 weeks. Woo! So definitely the Conjuring series. The original the original Nightmare on Elm Street will always be one of my favorites. And then I also really like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, those are all classics.
Yeah, I really like classic ones, or even the original black and white Dracula. I mean, I watched that when I was 10, and I love it. I'm kind of a classics girl that way, but I love the new stuff too. I mean, and the CGI and everything that they can do now, it just makes it amazing.
Well, we'd like to thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for being such a valuable asset and a great partner when we produce Pay Up. And I can't wait to show it to the world, and I can't wait to work again with you in the future.
Oh, me too. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you to all of you guys that are listening.
Horror show exclusive.
All right, we hope you enjoyed that interview with Veronica Burgess. Now, Mike and I are going to be reviewing a few choice horror films for the audience. What's first on our menu, Mike?
We're going to start out with one of the latest Shudder releases, Z. It's directed and co-written by Brendan Christensen, who just did Stillborn in 2017. And he's also a visual effects artist who did BFW and Bliss. Mm-hmm. So it's excellent films that he did visual effects on. And then it's co-written by Colin Minahan, who used to be known as one of the Vicious brothers, who did Grave Encounters and Extraterrestrial, both really good movies. And he also co-wrote It Stains the Sands Red and Stillborn. It stars Keegan Connor Tracy. She plays the mother. She's from Final Destination 2, White Noise, and she was the teacher in Bates Motel, the TV show. And she was also in Supernatural. The husband is played by Sean Rogerson, and he was in Grave Encounters and Extraterrestrial, Stillborn, and he was also in Supernatural. And the one that played the boy was Jet Klein, and he was the boy Brom in the movie The Boy, and he was also in Supernatural. And it's a lot like Prodigy, where it's about a creepy kid, but this one has to do with a imaginary friend named Z, who terrorizes this family.
I have very strange feelings about this movie because on the one hand, within 10 minutes of the movie, I was starting to feel a little bit frustrated because I feel like this is another Bad Kid Seed movie. We've seen this before. I know where this is going. I know what this movie is. I've seen too many of them. Then something weird started to happen. I genuinely started getting very creeped out by the movie. Like there's some scenes, and a lot of it, as actually watching it alone in my room at night, I started actually looking back over my shoulder and getting very uneasy and uncomfortable. And I kept getting mad at myself for being so damn scared because it's like, you know what's gonna fucking happen in the scene, you know, right now. There'd be some moments where I'd be looking at it as like, okay, this is the fucking scary moment. It's gonna pop up. Just do it and get it over with. And it still managed to scare me. So I don't know what it is about this movie. I can't put my finger on it. There are so many problems that I could list off with the plot, with how we've seen it all before, and some of the directions that it goes in. But it always kept me engaged and creeped out. I don't know if it's a matter of the craft. I don't know, superseding some of the cliches, or if I was just susceptible for it for a particular reason. I also found, interestingly enough, towards the end when the movie becomes less cliched, and it's kind of like interesting to think about the last act of the movie. When it becomes less cliched is also when it becomes less scary at the same time too, which I can't really explain. So it's a weird dichotomy where most of the movie feels like you've seen it before, but it's still creeping me out. The last part stops scaring me, but it's the most original part of the movie. So yeah. Very interesting. I had a weird reaction to it. Overall, I have to say, in spite of my complaints, I have to recommend this to people only because a horror movie is designed to, scare you, to creep you out, to get under your skin. And based solely on that, this movie really worked for me. I don't know if you had the same reaction that I did, but it actually genuinely got under my skin on parts.
Well, it did have some pretty decent scares and some pretty shocking moments that were very effective. But it's just that this
shocking moment that caught me off guard.
Yeah. And then I like the design of Z. I like the way he looked. I think a lot of the horror came from his look. And I just love like dark figures standing in a corner where you can barely make out their scary features. I think that's always scary to me. But after just seeing The Prodigy, which was so cliche, and then seeing movies like A Hole in the Ground, which was also cliche, but it was so solid from beginning to end. It was undeniable how great it was. With this one, it just too clunky along the way, and a handful of really great scenes that show me the potential of what it could have been, and it just annoyed me. Like it starts out right away like The Prodigy. The beginning of the story, a whole chunk of the beginning of the story is told through a montage. And just like The Prodigy, it's a very attractive middle-aged couple and a creepy little boy, and all of them are very good actors. Very good. The boy starts hitting kids at school, of course. It's the same in every one of these stories. And then with me, and it pissed me off that they wasted Stephen McHattie again. Stephen McHattie's talents were wasted once again on somewhat of a bit part, as he's a caricature of a therapist.
You know what my problem with Stephen McHattie's role in this movie? He actually does well with what he's given. If they put a little bit more into it, that actually could have been a really good character. I think there's potential with the mixture. It's like they just need to commit a little bit more to it. But what really impressed me in this was the mom. There's the facial expressions that she makes and reactions to her son are, I guess, some of the most realistic reactions I've seen in a movie about bad kids, or like these bad seed movies, where she seems flustered. You could see the love in her eyes, the fear, the frustration, and she manages to communicate so much with saying so little. So I thought she was just superb in this movie, and I think she's a big part of what, for me, she's a big part of what made it work. A lot of what made the movie snap together. I thought that the husband was solid, as well as the kid. A lot of it creeped me out. I don't want to spoil the movie for the audience. I initially didn't like the last act and where it was going because it stopped becoming scary, like I said, but it became less cliche. And it had me wondering about it, and I did some reading. I'm kind of fascinated by the ending now. I'm not sure if the story is about a hereditary mental illness or if it's about an actual haunting, or because it never makes clear who Z is or why Z decided to target this particular family and whether or not he's in the imagination of somebody or not. But I like that it kept an air of mystery that I still don't know exactly what the purpose of this creature was. So it's so weird because I recognize all of the film's flaws like you do, but for some reason I can only complain so much about it because it kept me engaged. And yeah, I know your all of your complaints are valid too. I totally see it there, but it just worked for me.
I was really enjoying the acting performances, especially the actress that played the mom.
Yeah.
Because not only did she have a great performance, she's absolutely beautiful, and she's a year older than me.
Really?
I think she's a vampire or something, dude. she looks like she's in her 20s or 30s.
And really quick, the actress's name is Keegan Connor Tracy. I really liked her performance a lot, and I want to see her do more. Because she has, like you said, she's beautiful, but she's not beautiful in a kind of Hollywood way. She's like a realistic type of beautiful, and there's a lot of character in her face.
Yeah.
Character and a lot of potential. And I was just really blown away by her performance. It's on Shudder, I believe. Yeah, it's a Shudder exclusive.
Yeah.
I'm a little confused. I consider this a 2020 movie because audiences and here didn't get to see it until this recently, till this year. But I think it had a release in Russia last year. So Russian audiences, for some reason, got this before we did.
This had more than a couple sequences that I really liked, especially when the mom goes looking for a play date for the little boy. And then, yeah, the whole sequence is really cool. How people just keep shutting the door in her face, and they don't want their kid to play with their son. And then it culminates in this really shocking moment, probably the most shocking moment of the movie. And I thought it was so good. It's so effective. It made my heart sink. It made me jump. It's like where the horror happens in front of you, but the filmmaker doesn't call attention to it. It's kind of a surprise. It almost happens in the background.
And I think that's what makes that scene so shocking and effective, is that a lot of the horrific situations in real life are not up in your face like a movie. Sometimes things happen in the corner of your eye, and what happens actually shook me for a second. Yeah. I had to gather my thoughts. I'm like, did that just really happen? Did I really see that happen? Did the filmmaker go there? And I wouldn't call it a jump scare. I don't know what that's the proper word for what he did in that scene, but it's definitely jolting. Jump scare isn't the proper term, but it jolts you alive and kind of makes your heart race a little bit. You're like, wow, did that just really happen? And then you get to see this is why they all shut the door in her face. Yeah.
And I like the mid-conversation scares like that. Like, just in the middle of talking, having a nice conversation, bam!
As a piece of filmmaking, I think it's just very well done. It's very well done. And you could tell that the director really put a lot into the movie visually and tried really hard to make everything work. The way that it's filmed, the camera angles, the use of darkness in the house at night is particularly effective, and one of the best things about the movie. Like you said, the design of Z, the monster, is a big part of what makes it work. But I like that you only see it in glimpses, and you don't really get to see Z full on. And the kind of tricks that they use, like when Z is eating at the table, and the way that the camera cuts to just like the glass of milk, that obviously where the milk inside is just shaking around. Very clever. And I like, for the most part, he's personified by just a really creepy drawing. Is the biggest point.
And that was another thing. The artwork of when the boy drew Z on his wall, I thought it was really good artwork and really gave you a good sense of how evil the character was and how evil the villain was. And then I like how after you show that Z is kind of influencing the boy, and then they show him innocently playing, and just the skill of the filmmaker is showing you it seems scary and off-putting, even though he just seems to be innocently playing, but he puts little details in there to give you a creepy feeling with just while the kid's playing.
Yeah.
And then Z in the tub with mom.
Oh, that scene actually.
That was really.
And that's another example. I knew what was going to happen in that scene, and it still scared me when it happened, even though it's so obviously telegraphing to the audience that something really creepy is about to happen. You could prepare yourself, and it still worked for me. I think this is one of those cases where the script has some problems and some holes in it, and it's kind of ambitious and it's kind of cliche at the same time. But the filmmaker is what really makes this work. I feel like most of the filmmaking is faultless, is what makes it work. It's the filmmaking and the acting that kind of taper over some of the flaws of the script.
Yeah, I think that most of the problems I had with it were with the script and not the filmmaking, because the filmmaking was solid, and just like I've said with other movies, when I see certain glimpses of greatness in a movie and really great scenes, it really makes me look at the rest of it with more of a critical eye, because I see the potential of what it could have been. I thought the climax was clunky and a little perplexing a bit, but it wasn't horrible. But I can see what they were going for. So it was interesting and clunky to me at the same time.
You know, I had kind of the same reaction, but why I kind of overcame my feeling about it is because it got me thinking after. I was like, that was kind of clunky, but at the same time, what they're trying to do in the climax of the movie is fascinating. You could tell that there's definitely a lot of interesting ideas going on in there. It arguably could have been executed a little better if the script had been a little bit more clear about certain things, but it definitely leaves you with something to think about once the movie's over. It stood with me a little bit after.
Wasn't the ending kind of reminiscent of Babadook?
Yeah, it was kind of reminiscent. I'm pretty sure this is a little bit influenced by it, though I also see a lot of Hereditary influence on here as well.
But it does make me want to see the director's last movie, Stillborn.
Yeah, because just based on his acting skills and his use of the camera and the way that he milks the scares, I could tell that this guy is very, very talented and has a lot of potential as a filmmaker. So what is the next movie on our list?
Our next movie is a Dario Argento classic, Inferno. Written and directed by Dario Argento, it's about an American college student in Rome and his sister in New York who both investigate killings in each location that are tied to witches. I didn't like this one. I mean, I know I've seen chunks of it because I went through an Italian horror kick like years and years ago. Like it's probably like 15, 20 years ago, where I watched this many Italian horror films. Like when I seen Demons and Demons 2, I wanted to see every Italian horror flick. So I know I've seen it around that time and thought it was pretty cool, but I just wasn't feeling it this time. I didn't care about any of the characters. It was like impressive set piece after impressive set piece, but I thought the story was poorly told. I wasn't invested in it at all. I found myself, like a kid, I was waiting for the next horror sequence, and I don't like doing that. I used to like doing that when I was a kid, but I don't like doing that anymore.
So with this movie, it's sort of a sequel. I'm misspeaking. A sequel to Suspiria. It's part of, I guess Dario Argento would call it his Three Mothers trilogy. The concept being that there are three different witches. They each lead a coven scattered across the world, and they bring like death and despair into the world. And Mater Suspirium, which is obviously the head witch in Suspiria, which came out before this. This one was about Mater Tenebrae. And then there's and there's Mother Lacrimose. I get a little bit confused as the sort of mythology, and I get what he's going for. It's sort of more of a thematic trilogy, and it takes place in the same world as Suspiria. But I feel like you said, there's a lot of really impressive set pieces, and it goes from set piece to set piece. but it doesn't work the way that Suspiria does, because it is imaginative and it is colorful and it is visually striking in the way that almost every Argento movie is. But Suspiria was so committed to its sort of irrational dream logic. It's so fully committed. And I think the fact that it sticks to one protagonist really draws you in. Like, the strength of Suspiria, Dario Argento's strengths are not writing. Everybody who loves him will tell you that he does not come up with the best scripts. So in order for his movies to work, he either has to get somebody else to write the script or commit fully to the onslaught of insanity. And I felt like if he wanted to go for this, he needed to commit a little bit more to the insanity, because I was initially really into it when it started, the first 20 minutes or so, because it has like these impressive visuals and these great set pieces. But I don't like the way that the movie keeps switching from protagonist to protagonist. It seems sloppy. There's no real reason for it. It doesn't add anything to the story. I don't really see what the justification is. And it's hard to glom onto everything when the protagonist keeps getting recycled over and over and over. And by the end, I actually stopped caring about what was going to happen in the story, and I was just kind of waiting for it to end. But I enjoyed a lot of it while it was going on. It's sort of weird. It's like eye candy, but it's hard to care about what's happening in the story. It's not like Suspiria, where it's kind of the same thing. He needed to go full throttle like he did with Suspiria if he was going to make this concept work.
It started out with that really long narration telling the whole three mothers story. So I thought, okay, this is going to be very story heavy. I'm prepared to be invested in this story. But then, and then while I'm preparing to be invested in this story, I'm like, I'm not invested yet, but oh, there's some really cool visuals. I'm still not invested yet, but oh, there's another really cool kill. Oh, there's some more really cool red lights and blue lights. And I kept waiting to get invested in the story, and I just never got into it. I just wanted to just go to sleep.
And I actually watched a handful of Argento films recently, and it's easily the weakest of the ones that I've been rewatching, because I rewatched Opera recently and Tenebrae. I hope I say that right. I don't like butchering names of things. And I enjoyed those a lot more than I did Inferno. Like a movie like Opera is... it follows one protagonist and it commits to the insanity to a greater degree than this one. So it has a lot of the same things that Inferno has, but without any of the things that stop Inferno from working. Dario Argento is one of those interesting directors, and he's open about it. He only says he doesn't care about the story. And I think in this movie, it shows a little bit too much that he doesn't care about the story.
Yeah, and some of Argento's like silly dialogue, like the women wanting to believe in the supernatural more than men. Like it's just came up as silly, but then it has that one really beautiful underwater shot of the girl diving into the water to get the key, but she stays under there way too long, and she sees that kind of floating body. So that whole sequence was really beautiful and really cool, but then suspension of disbelief where she can't stay underwater that long, and why are we staying under the water this long?
I was really impressed from a purely a filmmaking standpoint with the underwater sequence towards the beginning. I like the use of colors, the use of sound. It had an effective jump scare, but that's all it has is set piece after set piece. It's kind of like watching an action movie that has nothing to offer but action. I love a good action movie, and I love like spectacular set pieces, but there has to be something else there to engage you. This reminds me of those action movies that start off like initially thrilling with these massive set pieces that get you into it. And then as the movie goes along, you realize that's all it has to offer. There's nothing else to latch onto.
Well, I do like a lot of the kills, like the brutal stabbing sequences. Argento is one of the best at, him and Fulci are the best at these brutal stabbings where it seems like you feel that knife going in. And then the girl getting shoved through the glass. He loves killing women through glass, where he shoves her through the glass and kind of rams her neck into the shards of glass. Those are really cool, but it's just like long sequences of trippiness and strange red lights and blue lights, and women are walking around in the dark, just meandering for too long in some of those scenes where it's like, if you're going to give me a bunch of really cool horror set pieces, just get on to the next set piece and stop making me watch this woman walk around in red and blue light. It did have a lot of cool kills, like the crazy cat attack where it looked like the crazy cat lady was throwing cats at someone, and then the head chop with a butcher knife was awesome. The burning sheet thrown over someone and then them pushed through the window was really cool. But by the time it got to the climax, I was like done with it. It was just too much of like I was just sitting there bored to death, waiting for the next thing to happen, and then I'd perk up and see these great kills, and then I'd kind of settle back into being bored again. So,
see, I think I had the same reaction that you did. I had a really similar reaction, and for about half of the movie, I found myself trying to convince myself that I liked it more than I actually did, because I'd be like, "Oh, that's an awesome set piece. Oh yeah, this is why I'm watching it. Oh yeah, that's an awesome set pieces." But it starts to wear thin when there's nothing else to latch onto. Where his previous movie, like Suspiria, I felt in it. I felt like I'm part of this fever dream that he's having. I felt completely engrossed in this completely surreal, unrealistic world. And I don't think he does as nearly as good of a job in this one in following that film up. So it mostly doesn't work for me, but I do recognize a lot of Argento's talent on display. There's no denying that Argento, if nothing else, is a master stylist, and it comes through in this movie. It's just, It's hard to give a shit about any of it, though.
Yeah, because the set pieces are very impressive, really cool kills. As long as you don't mind just sitting through filler to get to the next sequence, so you'll enjoy it.
I could see why it would be a cult movie, and I could see why it would have its fans. I definitely could see that there is an audience out there for this movie. I am just not that audience.
It has his stamp on it and good things about it, but it just pales in comparison to some of his greats like Suspiria and Profondo Rosso. The next one we watched, I thoroughly enjoyed. This was by far my favorite film of this week, The Exorcist III from 1990. This was one that I slept on. After I seen Exorcist II, the Heretic, I didn't want to see another Exorcist film. I don't care about Legion. I didn't care about Exorcist III, but I kept hearing about George C. Scott's performance and the scares in it, and Brad Dourif. So, and plus Joe Bob hosted it this last Friday. But it was funny because I actually listened to it before I ever watched it, because we were watching it on a Zoom party with my friend Newt, and the picture was out. So I just sat there kind of listening to it the whole time. I was entertained listening to it, and I was even more entertained watching it. It stars the great George C. Scott as Kinderman. Ed Flanders, I loved Ed Flanders as Father Dyer. He was in Legion and Salem's Lot. Now I want to see Legion. It was a few years after this, but for some reason Ed Flanders still plays Father Dyer. And then Brad Dourif is amazing as the Gemini Killer. Jason Miller, who played Damien Karras, plays Patient X in this one. And I absolutely love Scott Wilson's performance as Dr. Temple. It's a really understated performance, and it's awesome. And this one is about a police lieutenant played by George C. Scott. And he's a friend to Damien Karras and investigates a series of murders with the same MO of the Gemini Killer, who has been dead for 15 years. It's an excellent mystery, an excellent crime drama, excellent character study, excellent horror film that's genuinely scary, and it's an existential head scratcher too that feels unpredictable, dangerous, engrossing, and really scary. I thoroughly enjoyed it, loved it.
I saw this when I was a teenager, and I think I actually turned it off halfway through because I got bored with it, and I really wasn't impressed with it on seeing it about over a decade ago. And I was really pleasantly surprised when I put this on again at how thoroughly engrossing I thought the whole story was. For one, I really like the casting of George C. Scott. He's replacing Lee J. Cobb from the original The Exorcist, because he died a few years after The Exorcist came out. And what's interesting is that they're both actors from the same era, and if you look at pictures of them, they kind of look a lot like each other and shared similar acting styles. That type of gruff, weathered, masculine, masculine type. They both fit it very well.
But with a sense of humor.
but with a sense of humor. So I had no problem buying that was the same character from the original Exorcist, despite the switch in actors, and I don't think they could have picked a better choice than George C. Scott. And apparently George C. Scott is more of a horror icon than I realized, because if you think about this and The Changeling, he's in some really quality work. My big problem with a lot of exorcism movies, and particularly with the Exorcist series itself, they all seem like they're doing the same thing over again, the same tropes, the way that slasher movies work, except for some reason it's more repetitive for an exorcism movie, because all you can do is sit there and compare it to the original Exorcist, and that's my problem with that subgenre, is even at its best, it still pales in comparison to the original. What makes this stand out is that it doesn't attempt to be like the original Exorcist or the way that any of the sequels were. It attempts to do something much more ambitious, much different than what any other Exorcist movie does. I think this has a magnificent jump scare in it. I'm not going to tell you what it involves, but it involves, well, I will tell you what it involves. It involves a nurse in a hospital at night, and it genuinely scared the shit out of me. It's up there with like the scene in The Thing where Kurt Russell starts putting the hot starts testing the blood and it jumps. It's up there with me in terms of its effectiveness. I think it has a lot of great atmosphere. I think all the performances are really great, and I love George C. Scott. He did a great job. But am I wrong in saying that the film's MVP is Brad Dourif?
Oh yeah.
My God, what an insane performance. I was so fucking blown away by Brad Dourif as the Gemini Killer. And this was a couple of years after Child's Play, and the same year that Child's Play 2 came out. He mentions Child's Play in the film in one of his lines. He says it's Child's Play. I have to wonder if that was intentional or not. But everybody knows me, I'm a big fan of the Chucky franchise. Brad Dourif was more horrifying than he's ever been in any of the Child's Play movies. I love Brad Dourif in Blue Velvet, and he was great in his Oscar-nominated performance in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But for me, this has to be his crown jewel acting performance. The dialogue that he's given, the way that he chews on it, he's absolutely mesmerizing to behold in every scene that he's in. I was totally blown away by his performance.
Well, William Peter Blatty gave him such huge, impressive monologues, and he just owned them.
Yeah.
I noticed he would talk for long periods of time, and I noticed myself slipping into, paying hyper attention to what he was saying, and I kept forgetting that it was an actor performing. And especially after hearing it, I heard the performance, and I was like, wow, that's really impressive. I can't wait to see him perform that. And then when I'm watching him, I keep forgetting that that's Brad Dourif. I keep forgetting that that's an actor performing, and I get into what he's saying, and it's disturbing. And
I love the way he switches his voices too. I feel like you could tell it's him, but he goes in between a higher pitched register and a deeper register, and the way that he switches the voice depending to emphasize certain things that he's saying makes him even creepier. Everything seems so deliberate in that performance.
Yeah, and he was supposed to be Damian Karras the whole time, but something happened with that actor. He couldn't be there every day, so they had to get Brad Dourif to come in and replace him.
Actually, no, that's not what happened.
What was it?
Originally, it was all Brad Dourif. William Peter Blatty made the film with just Brad Dourif in the cell, and the original actor who played Father Karras was actually not in the original cut of the movie, but the studio forced William Peter Blatty to swap out some scenes and to just to make it more marketable as a sequel to The Exorcist and to give it a little bit more ties. And Brad Dourif is actually on record as saying he's very disappointed with that choice, because even though he did great, he says that he put so much into it, and all the scenes that were taken out where he would have been in Father Karras' role frustrated him, because when he's Father Karras, there's more vulnerability and sadness to it. So I imagine he probably thought this was a dual role. So I know that Brad Dourif is unhappy that they swapped his parts out to put the original actor back in.
Well, it did work extremely well, and it didn't seem like something that was forced at all.
Mm-hmm.
I felt it, and I felt it was effective to the story to keep showing Damien like that.
See, there's a director's cut that was released by Shout Factory with Father Karras taken out and with Brad Dourif put back in. I'd be curious to see this. I actually tried searching for it in streaming and I couldn't find it because I wanted to see both versions to kind of compare. But from what I've read from fans of this film, people will say that they both work equally well for different reasons. That the studio changes that were brought upon this movie ended up working because William Peter Blatty, who wrote the original Exorcist and wrote the novel that it was based on, really committed to it. He just, instead of a lot of directors when they're forced, studio forces them to change shit, they probably just do things half-assed, pissed off. He decided, you know what, if we're going to do this, we're going to make this the best possible version. So from by all accounts, the theatrical version and the director's cut are equal and great for completely different reasons. So I'm really interested to see the William Peter Blatty cut.
Well, they forced him to add the exorcism in the climax as well, but that totally worked for me. I mean, since I listened to Joe Bob beforehand, I knew that he was forced to put that in there. I still really, really enjoyed it. It's that really rare case where a filmmaker takes the studio changes that are forced on and manages to turn them to a positive, because he didn't want to do the exorcism scene because he thought it would be cliche just to do it again. But he figured, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to blow you away. And that sequence is filled with some spectacular horror imagery, and the visuals are kind of mind-blowing. So despite all of the studio interference, William Peter Blatty was smart enough to try to make this work in his advantage instead of fighting it. Yeah, and I actually don't agree with Joe Bob with what he said about this movie. He was saying that, you can tell that it's a book author trying to direct a movie when he didn't know what he was doing, because the dialogue scenes went on too long, too much exposition and all that. I didn't feel that at all. I was completely invested in everything that was said. I thought everything belonged in it, and I loved how it wasn't a copy of The Exorcist, but it very much felt like the same world as The Exorcist. Mm-hmm. And it felt like the same characters. It had that 70s feel to it, but the best of 70s cinema. So I actually had to check again that it was 1990. It seemed like it was made 20 years earlier. And then it has that same type of beginning that The Exorcist did, with the quiet, contemplative beginning as the old priest looks at the stairs where Damien died. But then it has that opening sequence that the church doors fly open and there's a big grand sequence that quite didn't fit. But when it settled into the character development, and then you see George C. Scott's character, he has a sense of humor, he has rage, he has inner struggle, and an obsession that you can clearly see in his face. And most of all, he's real. Mm-hmm. It feels like he's going to walk off the screen into your living room.
Isn't it? I find it so weird that the switch in actors doesn't make it feel like a different person. I wonder if he studied Lee J. Cobb's performance, because the voice sounds the same and they already have such a similar look, that for a second was like, am I tripped? For a second it had me question. I was like, wait, I thought this was Lee J. Cobb. Am I wrong? I had to I had to do a double check just to make sure that I wasn't wrong. And as with regards to the Joe Bob's comments about it being too literary at times, I guess I could kind of see what he means in a couple of scenes where they describe murders instead of showing them. But at the same time, there's so many impressive visuals in this, and it's loaded with atmosphere. And when you think about the scenes with in the hospital at night and that jump scene, what makes them effective is how cinematic they are. It's the direction. It's not the way that it's written in the script. And while there is a lot of exposition and dialogue within the scenes in the cell where where George C. Scott is interviewing Brad Dourif, I thought they were well lit, that there was atmospheric in there. So yeah, it was a lot of dialogue, but I never got the feeling that this was an author trying to make a movie. It seemed like a natural film to me.
But it was phenomenal dialogue coming out of the mouths of phenomenal actors. Mm-hmm. And I love great writing and great actors. It's like watching a play, mm-hmm. or one like this where a book is really well the story of a book is really well told by an author, you know, because like when we see Carnage,
Yeah.
it was originally a play. You could feel that it was originally a play, but it was so effective because the dialogue was so good and it was coming from such great actors. And I love the relationship between Kinderman and Father Dyer in this one, and I love their conflict of how Kinderman is sick of humanity because of all these horrible things that he's seen as a cop over the years, and then Father Dyer still has faith, and then the tragedy of what happens between them, and then the descriptions of the murders I thought was so effective, much like Seven.
Mm-hmm.
The description of the murders, especially by George C. Scott, makes you feel as if you witnessed them.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it feel more disturbing than it is.
It's also the way that he describes it. It's George C. Scott's delivery. He seems when he starts describing the murders, he seems like he himself is genuinely disturbed and troubled by what he's telling the other characters in the movie.
Yeah, and then scenes like the confessional murder, where the woman comes to the confessional, scary as hell.
Really
you know,
eerie.
Atypical, you know.
There's even dips into surrealism, like the sequence of the dreams and the where he's imagining he's in heaven and then seeing all of an atmosphere that on the surface seems like it's heaven, but there are a lot of things about it that seem off. The placement of certain characters, the things that people are saying, really good at capturing a certain sort of the nightmarishness that I really do struggle with Joe Bob's assessment that the film is too literary, because I think it's very cinematic.
Yeah, and that nightmare sequence, especially the one with Fabio as an angel in it.
Oh,
it was like so weird. Like, it shouldn't work to see someone so recognizable that's on the cover of all these romance novels. To see him standing there with angel wings, it's kind of followed by a weird part where, George C. Scott is having this weird nightmare, and then it's followed by a shot of the house and a voiceover of George C. Scott saying, "What are you telling me?" Mm-hmm. It just kind of weird transitions like that almost seemed like a flaw, but I can't deny that it kind of went with the weirdness that the nightmare sequence was making me feel. One of the things I love the most about George C. Scott's performance in this one is him getting pissed. I counted him getting really pissed about 5 times, and it's so entertaining. He gets pissed at Father Dyer for dismissing his own sickness, and playing it off. He gets pissed when the policeman won't listen to him when he's trying to tell him about the Gemini killer. He gets pissed at the nurse when she's being difficult when he's questioning her. He gets pissed at traffic when he's trying to go save his wife. And then in the end, he gets pissed at the devil.
Because he's supposed to be from a different era, it kind of capitalizes on those masculine stereotypes, how blustery he is.
Yeah,
the type of stereotype of that being blustery, frustrated, masculine stereotype. But I feel like it works because it seems like it comes from a place of genuine caring. It doesn't seem like his anger is rooted in him just being a difficult person. His anger is rooted in the fact that he wants to get to the bottom of something, and he wants to stop these murders from happening. And I like that the movie really puts you in touch with his humanity as a person. I feel like you really understood who George C. Scott was. Like, you really feel like you knew the character. I've known people like that in my life. There's older men. He felt very real to me.
Yeah. And then with George C. Scott just chewing up the scenery with every scene he's in. And then way late in the movie, Brad Dourif comes along. And how the hell did he take over that movie like that with such a powerful performance from George C. Scott?
I think that's what makes his performance even more impressive, because with George C. Scott's performance being so strong, you don't think that there's any other acting that's going to equal it. And then until you get into The Cells with Brad Dourif, and he just blows you away. I couldn't take my eyes off of him. Every scene with him worked. His tonal shifts, the way that his facial expressions, everything about that performance was spectacular. You can tell Brad Dourif had a ball with this role, that he really just committed. It's the type of dialogue that most actors would kill to get in a script. Most actors wish that they could have these words coming out of their mouth and to be able to play with them the way that he does.
And when he talks about severing the heads of his victims and then turning the heads around so his victims can see their headless bodies, oh, it's chilling just talking about it.
He was definitely a sadist. I really like this movie a lot. You know, it had a very poor reception when it came out, and I could see why, because it's so different, and it's probably not what audiences were expecting from an Exorcist sequel, and I think that's what makes it so good. But over the years, it's garnered a cult reputation. I've known a handful of people that have been telling me, like, oh, The Exorcist 3 is awesome, and then I've heard it so many times over the years, even though I turned it off the first time. I thought, you know, I have to make my way back to this movie eventually, because there has to be something to this, that this many people really seem to love it, or that it has this big of a dedicated fan base. And watching it, it was nice to rediscover it and see why it's such a cult classic. I think I was like, oh, I get it now. I understand why people love this movie so much.
Well, so much of the horror elements are understated.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're one of the most frightening scenes of the movie isn't really visual. You're just right on the faces of these two characters in one room. But you're pretty much right on their faces the whole time. But he milks every bit of horror that you could possibly get out of that, and you're to the point where you're picturing all these horrific things that they're saying. It has this big, which should have been a huge horror sequence, which is this possessed old lady crawling across the ceiling. But the director doesn't call attention to it. He's just it's kind of in the background above George C. Scott's head, you know?
That makes it more effective. It's kind of like the scene we were talking about earlier in Z, where something is going off in the background that doesn't call attention to itself. And the fact that it doesn't call attention to itself makes it more jarring or more disturbing. It just feels like it's part of you. The fact that it's juxtaposed with these very banal settings, there's nothing unique or special going on, that makes it more uncanny. It's like the displacement or the dislodgement of reality when you see things like that. Instead of it feeling like a big showy set piece, it feels like horror creeping into the everyday, to the boring.
Yeah, exactly. And then the big exorcism at the end, it starts to come off as a showy set piece, but then the acting and some of those visual effects, like the practical effects of somebody being stuck to the ceiling, was fucking awesome. And I think what tied that whole scene together and brought it around to make it feel like the rest of the film is George C. Scott's acting. He's acting his ass off while he's pinned against the wall, and it's one of his best scenes.
It's a direct sequel to The Exorcist, because The Exorcist II: The Heretic was crap. Let's just be blunt about it. That's an awful movie. Does not live up to it. This started off as the script. William Peter Blatty wrote this as the script to be the sequel to Exorcist, to the original Exorcist. This was supposed to be part 2, and then it just didn't happen. Things got so jumbled, and they ended up producing the Heretic as the Exorcist sequel. This, despite its title, The Exorcist III, functions as The Exorcist II. It completely pretends the events of the second one didn't exist, and is a direct descendant of the original one. And I think, of course, having William Peter Blatty so involved makes it feel more like part of that world. I've hated every Exorcist sequel. And for this one to be, and I used to not like this one, but for this one to come at this point in my life and blow me away, makes me very happy to know that that franchise had something else going for it besides the classic original, which will always be one of the immortal classics of horror. One of the greatest films of all time, period.
Yeah, and this made me want to go back and see more George C. Scott. Like, I already, when you talked about The Changeling a few weeks ago, I already wanted to see that again because of the way you described it. But now I want to see it even more after seeing this. You just forget of what a phenomenal actor he was. I
mean, going back all the way to like his performance in Doctor Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick film, I loved him in that movie. He might have been the funniest character in that movie, and I like that he took the gruff masculine stereotypes that we have in The Exorcist III, but in that film it's played for satire and for comedy and for kicks. Makes me want to go back into his filmography and explore it a lot deeper. I still need to see Patton. I hope I did. I'm always mispronouncing movies. I've heard a lot of great things about that one. I've heard that's a great performance from him. This guy was he was a special actor. He brought something to the screen, so this type of very authentic believability. You didn't feel like you were watching a movie star. You felt like you were watching somebody who you might have known in your own life at some point.
Yeah, and he's so larger than life, so George C. Scott, and the fact that he was able to become this previous character,
yeah,
and to where he felt like that character, and someone as iconic as he was, I was so impressed with the whole thing. And then for Brad Dourif to come along so late in the movie and almost steal it away from George C. Scott, I just love movies like this period. This is my kind of horror film. My kind of horror film is heavy on story, heavy on really good dialogue with really good actors delivering the dialogue, and then it's mixed with all these, for lack of a better word, crowd-pleasing type of images and scariness and scares and stuff. I really enjoyed it.
I think it's fully deserving of its cult classic status.
Definitely.
So, it's available on Shudder if you want to check it out. If you want to watch it with Joe Bob's commentary, you could also watch it as well. Also available on Shudder. And the director's cut, which I'm going to have to check out sometime on my own, is available through Shout Factory. Great Shout.
Yeah, and I would recommend it as well, watching this with Joe Bob, because he was especially on fire that night.
So those are our 3 movies that we watched this week. I actually watched a few more, but we'll be discussing it on the upcoming podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, our interview with Veronica Burgess. Next week, we are going to be having an interview with Adrian Toffe, who is the director of Be My Cat, a film for Anne, which is an excellent found footage horror film that Mike and I reviewed on the podcast back in 2018. He'll be our special guest next week, and he's going to talk about that movie, his upcoming horror film, and how to get your films better represented on the festival circuit.
Yep, and check out our pages for all the upcoming stuff with Pay Up coming out. The Pay Up private screening is tonight, and we're going to be letting you know when we get accepted to festivals, when our next feature film project's coming up, when the horror show's coming back. So anytime you want any updates or anything, check out our pages. Instagram @Pickles Horror Show, and on Facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show.
Until next week, folks, happy horror.
Happy horror.